An abandoned dog finally gets a home after 3 years, but when her new owner opens the door, she refuses to enter. Not once, not ever. It seems like fear, but soon it becomes clear this dog isn't afraid of a house. She's waiting for something. Or someone. The rescuer thinks she's saving a broken animal. But the deeper she looks, the stranger it gets. Why does the dog always drag her back to the same deserted road? Why does she freeze at every doorway, staring into the dark as if she knows a secret no one else can see? A hidden past. A dangerous truth. And a loyalty so fierce, it could bring everything crashing down. What is this dog waiting for? And what happens when the truth finally steps out of the shadows? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The fluorescent lights of the county animal shelter buzzed overhead as Greer Halston burst through the double doors, her scrubs still wrinkled from her 12-hour emergency room shift. Her gray-green eyes were tired but determined as she approached the front desk, her practical shoes squeaking against the linoleum floor. "I'm here for Whisper," she announced, slightly out of breath. "I got a call that she's scheduled for ... Greer couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. The clerk, a middle-aged woman with graying hair, glanced at the wall clock. "We're closing in 15 minutes. Are you sure about this one? She's been here 3 times already. Nobody can handle her." Greer stood straighter, her nurse's bun slightly askew. "I'm sure. I've been visiting her for weeks. Please, just let me fill out the paperwork." The clerk shrugged and pulled out a thick stack of forms. Greer's hands trembled slightly as she filled them out, her normally neat handwriting rushed but still readable. Each signature felt like a promise, not just to the shelter, but to the quiet shepherd mix who had captured her heart during her volunteer visits. Minutes ticked by as Greer completed form after form. The overhead lights flickered, and somewhere in the back, a dog barked. Finally, she handed over her credit card for the adoption fee, ignoring the way her practical side reminded her about her tight budget. "Congratulations," the clerk said, though her tone suggested otherwise. "Let me get her for you." Moments later, Whisper appeared, led by a staff member. The medium-sized dog's muted brown and gray coat looked dull under the harsh lighting, but her intelligent eyes were alert and watchful. Old scars peeked through her fur, telling stories Greer could only guess at. "Come on, girl," Greer said softly, taking the leash. "Let's go home." Everything seemed fine until they reached Greer's old sedan in the parking lot. She opened the back door, expecting Whisper to hop in like any other dog. Instead, the shepherd mix planted her paws firmly on the asphalt and refused to move. "Whisper?" Greer patted the car seat encouragingly. "It's okay, girl. Just hop in." But Whisper remained frozen, her gaze locked on the access road leading away from the shelter. Her ears were perked forward, and her body was tense with purpose, not fear. Greer realized, but something else entirely. The shelter staff who had followed them out crossed their arms. "See? This is why she's been returned. Unplaceable behavior. You can still change your mind, you know." Greer felt her jaw tighten. After 12 hours of handling emergency room crises, she wasn't about to give up on this one. "No," she said firmly. "We'll figure this out." For the next 20 minutes, Greer tried every trick she could think of. She offered treats, spoke encouragingly, and even demonstrated by sitting in the back seat herself. Whisper remained unmoved, her eyes never leaving that distant road. Finally, Greer made a decision. "Fine," she said, more to herself than the dog. "We'll do this your way." She closed the car door and looked down at Whisper. "Would you rather walk?" For the first time since leaving the shelter, Whisper's tail gave a slight wag. Greer checked her watch. It was already past 6 in the evening, and her house was a good 30 minutes away on foot. But something told her this was important. "Okay then," she sighed, gripping the leash more securely. Lead the way. The walk home was slow but steady. Whisper moved with purpose, though she stayed beside Greer rather than pulling ahead. Every so often, she would stop and stare down cross streets or alleyways before continuing on their path. When they finally reached Greer's small house, with its tidy front yard and worn welcome mat, Greer felt a flicker of hope. Surely now Whisper would be ready to go inside and settle in. But as they approached the porch, history repeated itself. Whisper stopped at the bottom step, her paws planted just as firmly as they had been in the shelter parking lot. This time, her gaze was fixed on the dark street stretching out before them, as if she could see something there that Greer couldn't. "Come on, Whisper," Greer coaxed, tugging gently on the leash. "It's getting cold out here," but the dog wouldn't budge. She sat down, still staring into the darkness, looking for all the world like she was reading a map that only she could see. Exhaustion from her long shift washed over Greer, but she refused to give up. Instead, she went inside and gathered supplies: a thick blanket, an old bed she'd bought in preparation for her new pet, and some water and food bowls. "If you won't come inside," she told Whisper as she arranged everything on the covered porch, "then we'll make you comfortable out here for now." Whisper finally looked at her then, and Greer could have sworn she saw gratitude in those expressive eyes. The dog settled onto the bed. Though she maintained her vigilant watch on the street, Greer sat down next to her new companion, running a gentle hand over Whisper's scarred coat. "Whatever you're looking for out there," she murmured, "we'll figure it out together. This isn't ending with just paperwork, I promise you that." As the evening settled around them, Greer watched Whisper watching the street. In all her years of nursing, she'd learned to trust her instincts about people. Now those same instincts told her that Whisper's behavior wasn't random fear or stubbornness. The dog was searching for something or someone, and until they solved that mystery, thresholds would remain uncrossed. Greer adjusted the blanket around Whisper's shoulders and settled in for a long night. She might not understand everything yet, but she knew one thing for certain: saving this dog would take more than just an adoption certificate. It would take patience, understanding, and a willingness to follow wherever this mystery might lead. The morning sun cast long shadows across Greer's front porch as she sat with her coffee, watching Whisper. 3 days had passed since the adoption, and still, the dog refused to cross any threshold. She'd created a comfortable space on the porch: blankets, water bowl, food dish, and plenty of toys. But Whisper showed no interest in exploring further. "You've got to come inside sometime," Greer said softly, more to herself than the dog. Whisper lay on her bed, head resting on her paws, watching the street with that same intense focus she'd shown since day one. The dog ate well enough, drinking water and accepting treats. But she remained eerily silent. No barks, no whines, not even a growl. The shelter had named her well. Sometimes Greer wondered if she was capable of making noise at all. That morning, before her shift at the hospital, Greer tried a new approach. She set up a trail of hot dog pieces leading from the porch into the house. Whisper watched with interest but wouldn't budge from her spot. The treats remained untouched. "Okay, different strategy," Greer muttered. She grabbed Whisper's leash for their morning walk, hoping some exercise might help. As they made their way down the sidewalk, Greer noticed how the dog's demeanor changed. Instead of the passive resistance she showed at doorways, Whisper moved with purpose, pulling Greer toward the highway at the edge of town. It wasn't random wandering. Whisper led them to the same stretch of road every time, right near an old foreclosed farm with its rusty gate hanging crooked on its hinges. There, she would lie down and wait, her eyes fixed on the empty driveway as if expecting something or someone. Greer checked her watch, noting the time. 8:15, she said aloud, pulling out her phone to make a note. She'd started documenting these walks, recording the routes and times. There was something too precise about Whisper's behavior for it to be simple fear or confusion. While they waited, A local news van pulled up to the shelter, just visible down the road. Greer recognized Milton Arledge, the county commissioner, stepping out in his expensive suit. He smiled broadly for the cameras, gesturing as he spoke about his latest initiative for shelter cleanup and efficiency. Greer felt her stomach tighten. She'd heard rumors about Arledge's previous efficiency measures at other county facilities. They usually ended with budget cuts and closed doors. After 30 minutes of waiting, Whisper finally allowed herself to be led home. Greer had just enough time to get ready for her shift at the hospital. As she changed into her scrubs, she kept glancing out the window at Whisper, who had resumed her vigilant post on the porch. The afternoon brought unexpected trouble. Greer was just finishing her lunch break when Troy Arledge, Milton's nephew who worked intake at the shelter, appeared in the hospital parking lot. He was leaning against her car, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Miss Halston," he called out as she approached. "We need to talk about that dog." Greer kept her face neutral. "Her name is Whisper, and she's doing fine." Troy pushed off from the car, taking a step toward her. "That dog's dangerous. Should never have been put up for adoption in the first place. Best thing would be to bring her back to the shelter." "Dangerous?" Greer raised an eyebrow. "She hasn't shown any aggression. In fact, she's incredibly gentle. There's things you don't know about that dog." Troy insisted, his voice taking on an edge. "My uncle, the commissioner, he's concerned about liability. Shelter can't have adopted out a dog with ... issues." Greer met his gaze steadily. "The adoption papers are signed. Whisper is legally mine now. Unless you have specific evidence of dangerous behavior, we're done here." Troy's smirk vanished. "Don't say we didn't warn you." He turned and walked away, but Greer noticed how his hands were clenched into fists. That evening, Greer took Whisper on their usual walk. Once again, the dog led them to the foreclosed farm gate. This time, Greer brought a notebook, determined to document everything about their surroundings. The gate's broken chain, the overgrown driveway, the time of day. She recorded it all while Whisper lay in her usual spot. As darkness fell, a van without license plates crawled past their position. Whisper's head snapped up, her entire body going rigid. Her eyes locked onto the vehicle, following its progress until it disappeared around the bend. Greer quickly noted the van's description: white, rusted around the wheel wells, tinted windows. The incident confirmed what she'd been suspecting. Whisper's behavior wasn't random. The dog was watching for something specific, waiting for something or someone she recognized. Back home, Greer spread her notes across the kitchen table, visible through the front window where Whisper kept her silent vigil. Times, dates, routes, all pointing to a pattern she couldn't quite grasp yet. But one thing was becoming clear: there was intention behind the dog's stillness, a purpose to her peculiar behavior. A quick online search of Milton Arledge revealed countless photos of him at charity events and ribbon cuttings, always smiling, always talking about progress and efficiency. But buried deeper were comments about mysterious shelter closures, missing records, and a pattern of budget cuts that seemed to benefit private interests more than public good. Greer glanced at Whisper through the window. The dog's eyes were fixed on the street, as always, but there was something different in her posture tonight, an alertness that spoke of anticipation rather than fear. "What are you trying to tell me?" Greer whispered, adding another note to her growing collection. Whatever secret Whisper was keeping, it had something to do with that farm gate, that unmarked van, and possibly the Arledges themselves. The question was, how far should she dig to uncover the truth? For now, she would continue documenting, continue observing. Each detail might be important, each pattern might lead somewhere. Whisper's silence held answers. Greer just had to figure out how to decode them. The lights of another vehicle swept across the porch, and Whisper's head lifted slightly. But it was just a neighbor returning home, and the dog soon settled back into her watchful pose. Whatever she was waiting for, Greer realized was specific. And somehow, that foreclosed farm was at the center of it all. Greer added one final note to her observations. Whisper knows exactly what she's looking for. The challenge now was figuring out what that might be, and why the Arledges seemed so determined to prevent her from finding it. With her notebook clutched tightly in her hand, Greer pushed open the heavy glass door of the animal control office. The mid-morning sun streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. Whisper sat quietly beside her, eyes alert as always. Officer Lennox Ruiz looked up from his desk, his dark eyes curious beneath salt and pepper brows. His neat uniform and steady presence gave off an air of quiet competence that made Greer feel instantly more confident about her decision to come here. Officer Ruiz? Greer stepped forward. I'm Greer Halston. I need to talk to you about something I've been noticing. Lennox gestured to the chair across from his desk. Please have a seat. And call me Lennox. His gaze shifted to Whisper. This must be the famous shelter dog I've been hearing about. Greer sat down, letting out a deep breath. Yes, this is Whisper. Actually, she's part of why I'm here. She opened her notebook, revealing pages of careful observations, times, dates, and sketched maps. For the past week, every time I walk her, she leads me to the same spot, that old foreclosed farm out on Highway 27, just past mile marker 42. Lennox leaned forward, his expression turning serious. That's interesting. We've had some reports from that area. Reports? Greer's heart beat faster. Multiple calls about suspicious vehicles. Usually late at night. Lennox pulled out a thick folder and spread several incident reports across his desk. Vans without license plates. Strange noises. We've gotten complaints about animal sounds coming from that direction, but every time we do a drive-by, everything's quiet. Greer's fingers trembled slightly as she pulled out her phone, showing him the photos she'd taken. Like this van? The grainy image showed a dark vehicle without plates crawling past the farm gate in the darkness. Lennox's eyebrows shot up. Exactly like that. When did you take this? 3 nights ago, around 2 in the morning. Whisper was absolutely fixated on it. Greer spread out her notes next to Lennox's reports. Look at the pattern. The times I've recorded Whisper's unusual behavior line up perfectly with these complaint calls. They spent the next hour overlaying timestamps and locations, creating a clear picture of regular nighttime activity centered around the abandoned farm. Lennox pulled up property records on his computer, his frown deepening as he clicked through several screens. This is interesting, he muttered. The farm's technically owned by a series of shell companies, but if you follow the paper trail ... He turned the screen so Greer could see. They all lead back to businesses connected to Milton Arledge. Greer's stomach clenched. The county commissioner? His nephew Troy tried to pressure me into returning Whisper to the shelter. That doesn't surprise me. Lennox sat back, running a hand through his hair. The Arledges have their fingers in everything around here. But this ... He gestured at their collected evidence. This is starting to look like something bigger than just one dog. Would you come look at the property with me? Greer asked. Whisper keeps trying to show us something there. I know it. Lennox agreed, and they drove out to the farm in his official vehicle, Whisper sitting alertly in the back seat. The old gate was padlocked, rust creeping along its chains. As soon as they parked, Whisper jumped out and made a beeline for a deep ditch running alongside the entrance. Look at this, Lennox said, crouching down to examine the ground. Deep tire ruts scarred the earth, fresh enough that the dirt was still loosely packed. These are recent. Heavy vehicles, probably those vans, turning in and out regularly. Whisper paced along the ditch, nose working overtime, whining softly, the first sound Greer had heard her make since the adoption. Can't we go in? Greer asked, watching the dog's distress. There's clearly something wrong here. Lennox shook his head. Without probable cause or a warrant, We can't enter private property. Even with these suspicions, we need more. What would count as probable cause? Greer pressed, unwilling to give up. Direct evidence of criminal activity. Clear signs of animal abuse or neglect. Documented proof of illegal transport. Lennox listed off, then added carefully, the kind of thing that might be captured if someone were to keep very detailed records of suspicious activity. Greer met his eyes, understanding dawning. Someone who was already watching the property and taking notes. Exactly. Lennox lowered his voice. Look, I can't officially investigate without more evidence. But off the clock, I can keep an eye on things. If you're willing to keep documenting everything you see. I am, Greer said firmly. This isn't just about Whisper anymore, is it? No. Lennox watched as Whisper continued to work her way along the ditch, her behavior precise and purposeful. I think we're looking at an organized operation. Moving animals through here like cargo, probably tied to illegal breeding or worse. The question is, how high up does it go? They stood in silence for a moment, watching Whisper. The shepherd mix had stopped at the corner of the property, her gaze fixed on the empty buildings beyond the gate. Something in her posture spoke of loss and longing, and Greer felt her heart ache. Whatever was happening here, Whisper knew, and she was trying to tell them, in the only way she could. I'll keep detailed records, Greer promised. Times, dates, vehicles, everything I notice. And I'll call you the moment I see anything that might qualify as probable cause. Lennox nodded, his expression grim but determined. I'll do some quiet digging into these shell companies. There's a pattern here we're not seeing yet. But be careful, Greer. If what we suspect is true, there are powerful people who won't want this exposed. They drove back to town in thoughtful silence, both aware that they'd stepped into something much larger than a simple case of a troubled shelter dog. Whisper sat alert in the back seat, her eyes never leaving the road behind them, as if she knew her mission to communicate had finally begun to succeed. Greer sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by a scattered array of papers and notes. Her years of working in the emergency room had taught her the importance of tracking patterns and details, skills she now applied to understanding Whisper's mysterious behavior. With careful precision, she marked locations and times on a local map, creating a visual record of every spot where Whisper had shown particular interest. The morning light streamed through her window as she heard a knock at the door. Lennox stood there, holding a thick manila envelope. I managed to get these, he said quietly, stepping inside. Delivery invoices from Cedar Valley Crating. They supply most of the animal transport boxes in the county. Greer cleared space on the table as Lennox spread out the papers. How did you get these? Let's just say I have a friend in their accounting department who's concerned about where some of their products are ending up. Lennox pulled out his reading glasses. Look at this pattern, large orders, always paid in cash, delivered to various addresses that don't quite check out. Together, they began cross-referencing the delivery dates with Greer's documented observations of Whisper's behavior. Greer's nursing instincts kicked in, the same ones that helped her prioritize patients in the A, as she organized the information systematically. Here, she said, pointing to one invoice. This delivery address, it's listed as a storage facility, but these coordinates double quotes, she checked her map. They match the outbuildings on the Arledge property. Lennox leaned in closer. That's not a coincidence. The quantity ordered is suspicious too. 50 crates in one delivery? For a storage facility? Greer felt her pulse quicken. We need to see what's happening there. Carefully, Lennox cautioned. We can't trespass, but we can observe from the public road. Would tomorrow afternoon work? I'm off duty, Greer nodded, already planning. I'll need to find somewhere safe for Whisper. I don't want her anywhere near that property until we know more. Smart thinking, Lennox agreed. Any ideas? My friend Sarah from work. She has a fenced yard and loves dogs. She's been wanting to meet Whisper anyway. Greer reached for her phone. I'll call her now. The next afternoon, after settling Whisper at Sarah's house, Greer met Lennox in his personal vehicle, less conspicuous than his animal control truck. They'd chosen their observation point carefully, a pull-off on the public road that offered a clear view of the Arledge property's main entrance and outbuildings. Lennox handed Greer a pair of binoculars. Remember, we're just watching. Nothing that could be considered trespassing or interference. They didn't have to wait long. Within an hour, a white box truck with no company markings turned into the property. Greer raised her binoculars, focusing on the vehicle's movement. No license plate, she murmured. Just like the van we've seen before. They watched as the truck disappeared behind one of the outbuildings. 20 minutes later, it emerged and headed back toward the main road. Lennox raised his camera, capturing clear shots of the vehicle. Did you notice? He asked. The truck rode higher going in than coming out. Whatever they loaded or unloaded changed its weight significantly. A sudden gust of wind caught their attention. Near the nearest outbuilding, a blue tarp that had been secured over something flapped loose at one corner. Through her binoculars, Greer caught a glimpse of what lay beneath. Stacked wooden crates, similar to the ones from the invoices. We need to document any identifying marks on those crates, Lennox said thoughtfully. Serial numbers, manufacturer stamps, anything that could connect them to specific orders. But how? We can't go on the property. No, but they must dispose of broken crates somewhere. If we check the public dumpsters near their other known properties, we might find discarded materials with the same markings, Greer finished. That would create a paper trail. They spent another hour observing, documenting every vehicle and movement they could see from their legal vantage point. As the sun began to set, they packed up their equipment and headed back to town. I'll start checking disposal sites tomorrow, Lennox said as he dropped Greer off to pick up Whisper. We'll need to be systematic about this. Photograph everything. Document where and when we find each piece. When Greer arrived at Sarah's house, she found Whisper had spent most of the afternoon sitting by the front door, refusing to engage with toys or treats. Sarah seemed worried. She's been so focused on that door, Sarah said. Like she's waiting for something. Or someone. I know, Greer replied softly, clipping on Whisper's leash. That's her way. The drive home was quiet, Whisper alert in the backseat as always. As they approached Greer's house, the dog's attention shifted, her gaze fixed on the darkening street ahead. Once again, when they reached the porch, Whisper assumed her sentinel position at the threshold, eyes locked on the distance as if reading an invisible map. Greer knelt beside her, gently stroking the dog's soft fur. I promise you, she whispered, we're going to find what you're looking for. Whatever it takes, we'll figure this out. Whisper didn't respond, she never did, but something in her posture seemed to relax slightly, as if she understood that finally, someone was truly listening to her silent message. Inside, Greer began organizing the day's photographs and notes, adding them to her growing collection of evidence. Her A training had taught her that sometimes the smallest details could be the key to understanding a larger crisis. As she worked, she could hear Whisper's steady breathing from her position by the door, patient, determined, and unwavering in her mission to communicate what she knew. The night deepened around them as Greer continued her work, each piece of evidence carefully logged and cross-referenced. Tomorrow they would begin searching for those discarded crates, building their case piece by piece. For now she let Whisper maintain her vigil, understanding that sometimes the most important thing was simply not giving up, no matter how long the wait might be. The morning started with an unwelcome phone call that jolted Greer from her much-needed sleep. Her cell phone buzzed insistently on her nightstand, and when she answered, Lennox's voice carried an edge of urgency she hadn't heard before. Milton filed a formal complaint against you this morning, he said without preamble. He's claiming you stole a dangerous animal from the shelter. Says proper procedures weren't followed. Greer sat up straight in bed, her heart pounding. Through her bedroom window, she could see Whisper in her usual spot on the porch, head resting on her paws but eyes alert. That's ridiculous. I have all the paperwork. Everything was done by the book. I know that, but Milton's got influence with the county board. He's pushing for an emergency hearing. Lennox paused, and she could hear papers shuffling in the background. Listen, I got a heads up from someone at the front desk. Troy's been making calls, warning certain properties about possible inspections coming their way. Greer's mind raced. He's trying to clean house before we can find anything concrete. Exactly. But here's the thing. I've got the complaint paperwork on my desk right now. And I'm thinking it might take me, a while to process it properly. Lots of forms to fill out. You know how bureaucracy works. The hint in Lennox's voice was clear. How long can you buy me? Maybe 24 hours before I absolutely have to file it. Make them count. Greer was already pulling on her jeans, phone tucked between her ear and shoulder. I will. Thank you, Lennox. After hanging up, she moved quickly. She'd learned in the IA that, when time was limited, you had to focus on what mattered most. Right now, that meant finding something, anything that could link Milton to illegal activities before he could shut down their investigation completely. She drove to the stretch of highway where they'd seen the suspicious trucks, Whisper riding shotgun beside her. The morning sun cast long shadows across the pavement as they pulled onto the shoulder. Other people might have missed it, but Greer's trained eye caught the heap of debris partially hidden in the drainage ditch. Someone had been doing cleanup work, and recently. Stay here, girl, she told Whisper, who watched intently as Greer climbed down into the ditch. Among the scattered trash and branches, she found what looked like pieces of wooden crating, edges blackened and charred. Someone had tried to burn the evidence. Greer pulled on a pair of latex gloves from her purse, another habit from her medical work that was coming in handy. She carefully examined each piece, looking for anything distinctive. On her fourth piece, she found it. Beneath the scorched surface, a brand was still visible. She recognized it as the kind used in livestock sales, a simple but distinctive mark that looked like two crossed arrows inside a circle. Her hand shook slightly as she took photos with her phone, documenting the brand from multiple angles. This wasn't just trash. This was proof that someone was moving animals through legitimate channels, disguising illegal trafficking as normal livestock business. When she brought the panel to Lennox at his office later that morning, his eyes widened as she explained what she'd found. He examined the brand carefully, then set it down with a heavy sigh. This is good work. Greer, really good. But ... He ran a hand through his hair, looking troubled. We need to be extremely careful now. That brand belongs to the Greater Midwest Livestock Exchange. They're completely legitimate on paper, which means we need rock-solid evidence before we can even suggest they're involved in anything illegal. But this proves there's a connection, Greer insisted. Why else would their branded crates be burned and dumped by the highway? I agree, but Milton's not stupid. He's already showing he'll use the system against us. Lennox leaned forward, his voice dropping. He's got his eye on you now, and that means Whisper's in danger too. One wrong move, one mistaken procedure, and he could have her seized as a dangerous animal. We have to do this by the book. The reality of the threat hit Greer hard. She thought of Whisper, still searching so determinedly for something or someone. So what do? We build our case carefully. This brand gives us something concrete to work with, but we need more. Documentation, witnesses, anything that can stand up in court. He gestured to the complaint papers still sitting on his desk. I'll keep this tied up as long as I can, but you need to be extra careful. No more solo investigations. Everything by the book from here on out. Greer nodded, understanding the stakes had just gotten much higher. She thought about Whisper, who had trusted her enough to come home with her, who still waited so patiently by every threshold. She couldn't let her down now. "I'll be careful," she promised. "But I'm not backing down. I didn't think you would." Lennox managed a small smile. "Just remember, Milton's not just a businessman anymore. He's an enemy who knows you're coming for him. Watch your back." As if to emphasize his point, a county vehicle pulled into the parking lot outside his window. Milton's sleek black SUV. Greer gathered her evidence quickly, slipping out the back door while Lennox prepared to stall their adversary. The branded crate panel was securely wrapped in her bag, their first real piece of evidence against whatever operation Milton was running. She drove home, taking a circuitous route, checking her rearview mirror frequently. When she finally pulled into her driveway, Whisper met her at the car door, pressing against her leg as if sensing her tension. Greer knelt down beside her, scratching behind her ears. "We're getting closer," she whispered to the dog. "I promise you that. Whatever they're hiding, whoever you're looking for, we're going to find out the truth." Whisper's steady gaze seemed to hold both trust and warning. They had found their first real lead, but with it came real danger. Milton's complaint wasn't just a legal maneuver, it was a message. He could take Whisper away, destroy Greer's credibility, and shut down their investigation all at once. But they had something now too. Proof that animals were being moved through the auction house, their transport disguised as legitimate livestock sales. It wasn't enough to bring down Milton's operation, but it was a start. A thread they could pull to unravel whatever secret operation was hiding behind the Greater Midwest Livestock Exchange's respectable facade. That night, Whisper took up her usual position by the front door, her eyes fixed on the street beyond. But this time, Greer noticed something different in her posture, a new tension, as if the dog sensed they were getting closer to whatever she had been searching for all this time. Late into the night, Greer sat cross-legged on her living room floor, surrounded by stacks of paperwork from the shelter. Whisper lay in her usual spot by the open front door, her watchful eyes fixed on the dark street outside. The warm glow of a desk lamp cast long shadows across the scattered veterinary cards and intake logs that Greer had been studying for hours. "There has to be something here," Greer muttered, rubbing her tired eyes. Years of working night shifts in the EHOD taught her to look for patterns, to piece together stories from fragmented information. She picked up another intake form, this one yellowed with age, and something caught her eye. The initial entry, dated 3 years ago, described Whisper's condition when she was first brought to the shelter. Female shepherd mix, approximately 2 years old, showing signs of recent nursing. Mammary glands enlarged, producing milk. Greer's heart began to race. She shuffled through more papers until she found the follow-up notes from that same week. Several attempts to locate puppies in area of capture unsuccessful. Subject displays extreme agitation when separated from search area. "Oh my God," Greer whispered, looking over at Whisper with new understanding. "You're not fearful at all, are you? You're searching for them." Whisper's ears perked up at Greer's voice, but her eyes never left their vigil of the street. The next morning, Greer called Lennox as soon as she knew he'd be on duty. "I need to show you something," she said. "It changes everything we thought about Whisper." They met at a quiet diner on the edge of town. Greer spread the old records across the table between their coffee cups. As Lennox read through them, his usual skeptical expression softened. "A mother looking for her puppies," he said quietly. "That explains the fixation on certain areas, the refusal to settle in anywhere permanently. Every threshold she won't cross," Greer added. "Every time she plants herself and stares down the road, she's not being difficult or traumatized. She won't accept a new home because she's still searching for her old one. Or more specifically, for what was taken from it." Lennox drummed his fingers on the table, deep in thought. "This gives us more to work with, but we still need legal backing to do anything about it." He paused, then seemed to make a decision. "I know someone who might be able to help." Judge Marion Ellis, she retired last year, but she's still sharp as a tack and she knows how to write rock-solid warrants. Would she help us? She's had run-ins with Milton Arledge before. Can't stand his bullying tactics. Let me make a call. That afternoon, they sat in Judge Ellis's home office, a warm room lined with law books and family photos. The judge, a silver-haired woman with keen eyes, listened intently as they presented their evidence. The branded crate panel, the auction house connections, and now the records showing Whisper's history. Milton Arledge has been throwing his weight around this county for too long, Judge Ellis said, adjusting her reading glasses as she examined the documents. A limited warrant, focused specifically on those outbuildings where you found the brand match, that's defensible. Especially with these intake records showing a pattern of suspicious animal movement through that property. She pulled out a legal pad and began drafting, her handwriting precise and deliberate. We'll make it narrow enough that they can't claim overreach, but thorough enough to protect your search. That evening, as Greer sat with Whisper in their usual spot by the door, she saw her companion's behavior in a completely new light. The dog's steadfast refusal to fully enter any building wasn't stubbornness or fear, it was a mother's unwavering loyalty. I understand now, Greer said softly, reaching out to stroke Whisper's fur. You can't call anywhere home while part of your family is missing. But tomorrow morning, we're going to start changing that. Whisper turned her head slightly, meeting Greer's eyes for a moment before returning to her watch. In the distance, a clock struck midnight, and Greer began preparing for the dawn search that would finally put Whisper's silent insistence to the test. She laid out her gear, flashlights with fresh batteries, her phone with the camera ready, copies of the warrant, and a first aid kit, hoping she wouldn't need it, but knowing better than to go unprepared. Each item she checked off her mental list brought them one step closer to uncovering the truth behind Whisper's 3-year vigil. The warrants were clear and specific, targeting only the outbuildings where they'd found evidence of the animal transport operation. Judge Ellis had been thorough, ensuring every detail would stand up to legal scrutiny. They couldn't afford any mistakes, not when they were finally so close to answers. As Greer finished her preparations, she looked again at Whisper, still maintaining her silent watch. Just hold on a little longer, she whispered. We're almost there. The eastern sky hadn't yet begun to lighten when 3 unmarked police vehicles rolled silently down the gravel drive toward Milton Arledge's property. Greer sat in the passenger seat beside Lennox, her heart hammering against her ribs. Whisper lay quietly in the back, her eyes alert and focused. Remember, Lennox said in a low voice, we stick to the exact location specified in the warrant. No exceptions. Greer nodded, clutching her camera. The retired judge, Harold Manning, followed in his own car to ensure everything stayed within legal bounds. 4 deputies spread out around the perimeter as Lennox parked near the first outbuilding. Ready? He asked, checking his flashlight. As I'll ever be, Greer answered, clipping Whisper's lead to her collar. The morning air felt crisp and clean as they approached the first shed. Whisper moved with purpose, her nose working the air. She stopped at the padlocked door, tail straight and rigid. One of the deputies stepped forward with bolt cutters. The lock fell away with a dull clank. Inside, the beam of Lennox's flashlight revealed metal shelving stacked with ledgers and shipping manifests. Greer's hands trembled slightly as she photographed each page, making sure to capture dates and locations clearly. Look at this, Lennox muttered, pulling on latex gloves to handle a particularly worn notebook. Transport logs going back 3 years. All these shipments labeled as livestock supplies. Judge Manning stood in the doorway, his lined face grim. Document everything meticulously, he reminded them. Chain of custody is crucial. They moved methodically through the targets outlined in their warrant. The cooling room made Greer's stomach turn. Though empty now, the lingering smell of antiseptic couldn't mask other scents. Dark stains marked the concrete floor. Metal tables lined the walls, their surfaces scratched and worn. She photographed everything, fighting back tears as she documented the breeding tools arranged with clinical precision. Whisper grew more agitated as they entered each new space, her normally silent demeanor broken by soft whines. She pulled Greer toward specific doors and corners, as if she knew exactly what they needed to find. "The dog seems to have a map in her head," one of the deputies observed quietly. "She does," Greer replied, her voice thick with emotion. She lived this. In the ledger office they hit pay dirt. Filing cabinets yielded carefully organized records, breeding histories, sales receipts, shipping manifests. Lennox tagged each document with evidence markers while Greer's camera clicked steadily. "This is the first real crack in Milton's facade," Lennox said, satisfaction evident in his voice. "These records tell a story he can't easily explain away." Judge Manning nodded approvingly. "The warrant's scope may be narrow, but what we've found here is substantial." As they finished processing the last authorized location, Whisper suddenly strained at her lead, pulling Greer toward a fenced area behind the main building. The dog's entire body vibrated with intensity, but the chain-link enclosure wasn't included in their warrant. "I'm sorry, girl," Greer whispered, holding firm on the lead despite Whisper's insistence. "We can't go there." "Not today." The dog planted her feet, refusing to move, her gaze fixed on whatever lay beyond that fence. Greer felt the familiar ache in her chest, the frustration of being so close yet still constrained by legal boundaries. Lennox appeared at her side, his expression sympathetic but firm. "We've got enough to establish a pattern," he said quietly. "This is just the beginning." As they packed up their evidence, Greer watched the sun finally break over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. They had achieved something significant, the first legitimate peek behind Milton's carefully maintained veneer. But Whisper's reaction to that fenced area told her there was still much more to uncover. "We'll come back," she promised softly, both to herself and to Whisper, as they walked back to their vehicles. "What we found today is just the first step." Judge Manning stopped beside them before getting into his car. "You've done good work here," he said. "Clean, disciplined, by the book. That's how we'll bring this operation down, piece by legal piece." Greer helped Whisper into the back seat, noting how the dog's eyes remained fixed on that fenced plot until they turned onto the main road. The evidence bags in the trunk contained proof of systematic wrongdoing, but Greer knew they hadn't yet reached the heart of what Whisper was trying to show them. The morning light strengthened as they drove back to the station, illuminating their small convoy. They had momentum now, Greer realized, maybe not enough to end Milton's operation immediately, but enough to start dismantling it through proper channels. She reached back to scratch Whisper's ears, earning a soft exhale from the dog. "We're getting closer," she murmured. "I promise we'll keep going until we find what you're looking for." Lennox glanced at her, then back at the road. "One step at a time," he said. "But we're definitely on the right path now." The triumph was short-lived. The attack came without warning, brutal and devastating in its swiftness. Greer was cataloging evidence with Lennox when the first whiff of smoke reached them. Within seconds, thick black clouds began pouring from the barn's roof. The acrid smell of burning plastic and hay filled the air as flames licked up the wooden walls. "Troy!" a deputy shouted, pointing to a figure running away from the building. "He set the barn on fire." Panic erupted. Deputies scattered, some pursuing Troy, others calling for fire trucks. But Greer's blood ran cold when she heard another shout cut through the chaos. "The dog!" Whisper ran back inside. Without thinking, Greer sprinted toward the burning building. Lennox grabbed her arm. "Greer, wait! It's not safe." She yanked free. "There are animals in there." The heat hit her like a wall as she approached the entrance. Smoke burned her eyes and throat. She pulled her shirt over her nose and plunged into the inferno. The interior was a nightmare of flames and choking black smoke. Cages lined the walls, many already empty. Whether from rescue or Troy's preparations, she couldn't tell. Somewhere in the darkness she heard barking, whisper. Her voice was lost in the roar of the fire. Burning debris rained down as support beams groaned overhead. The temperature was unbearable. She found Whisper at the back of the barn, pawing desperately at a welded cage door. Inside, a young dog cowered. The metal was hot to the touch, but Greer spotted bolt cutters on a nearby workbench. Her hands shook as she grabbed them. "Hold on, girl. Just hold on." The cutters were heavy, but desperation gave her strength. The metal snapped under her third try. She yanked the door open and scooped up the terrified dog, pushing it toward the exit. Whisper refused to move until the other dog was clear. The building was becoming an oven. A massive crack echoed through the barn as a beam gave way. Greer grabbed Whisper's collar and pulled. "We have to go, now." They burst out of the barn seconds before a thunderous crash announced the partial collapse of the roof. Greer fell to her knees in the grass, coughing violently. Lennox and the deputies rushed to help, pulling them further from the burning building. The fire department arrived, but it was too late for much of the evidence. What wasn't destroyed by the flames was soaked by the water used to fight them. Greer watched helplessly as years of records literally went up in smoke. The aftermath was grim. Troy had disappeared, though his truck was found abandoned 2 counties over. Many of the animals they'd hoped to rescue were gone, either moved before the fire or lost to it. The careful collection of evidence they'd gathered was now fragmented and imaged, but the worst blow came the next morning. Lennox was called into a closed-door meeting with his superiors. He emerged looking defeated. "They're suspending me," he told Greer quietly. "Pending an internal review for procedure concerns. They're saying I overstepped my authority, that the warrant wasn't properly executed." Greer's hands clenched into fists. "That's ridiculous. We followed every protocol. The judge was there. Milton has friends in high places. They're looking for someone to blame, and I'm the easy target." Lennox's voice was bitter. "They're trying to discredit everything we found." The weight of failure pressed down on Greer's shoulders. Without Lennox's authority, without the bulk of their evidence, the case against Milton's operation was crumbling. She'd come so close to exposing the truth, to bringing justice for all the animals that had suffered. Now it was slipping away like ash in the wind. That evening, she took Whisper for their usual walk. The dog led them, as always, to the highway gate. There, Whisper lay down, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon with an emptiness that broke Greer's heart. The dog's entire posture spoke of defeat, as if she knew they'd lost their chance to find whatever, or whoever, she'd been searching. For all this time, Greer sat beside her, running gentle fingers through the dog's fur. The dread she'd been fighting all day finally overwhelmed her. She might lose everything: the case against Milton, her chance to protect other animals from his operation, and possibly even Whisper herself. Milton's complaint about her stealing a dangerous dog still hung over her head, and now she had even fewer allies to help fight it. The sun set behind them, painting the sky in shades of orange that reminded her too much of the flames that had devoured their hopes. Whisper's head rested heavy on her lap, both of them watching the empty road as darkness crept in. All their work, all their careful planning and documentation, reduced to ashes by one act of desperate destruction. The truth they'd fought so hard to uncover was now buried deeper than ever, protected by power and money and the kind of influence that could make evidence disappear and good men lose their jobs. Greer stroked Whisper's head, feeling the dog's steady breathing against her leg. "I'm so sorry, girl," she whispered. "I'm so sorry I couldn't make it right." But as the stars began to appear above them, a small spark of determination flickered in her chest. They had lost this battle, but perhaps not the war. As long as Whisper kept searching, Greer would too. There had to be another way to expose Milton's operation, to protect the animals he saw as nothing more than commodities. The highway stretched empty before them, the gate standing like a silent sentinel in the growing dark. Whisper's eyes never left that distant point where the road disappeared into shadow, holding onto her vigil with the same quiet determination that had first caught Greer's attention at the shelter. Greer's fingers flew across her keyboard as she cross-referenced the auction brand against regional sale calendars. Her eyes widened as a pattern emerged. Regular after-hours auctions listed in 2 counties over, with suspicious entries for farm equipment that didn't match any normal agricultural sales. "Look at this," she told Lennox, who stood beside her desk despite his suspension. "They're hiding the dogs in plain sight." The retired judge reviewed their findings with sharp attention. Within hours, he secured a narrow authorization for a sting operation. Though Lennox had no official standing anymore, his experience was too valuable to waste. He would assist as a civilian consultant. The auction yard sprawled under harsh sodium lights, casting everything in sickly orange. Greer kept Whisper close as they waited in position. The dog's attention snapped to a truck pulling in, Troy at the wheel, Milton nowhere in sight. As workers began unloading crates, Whisper's demeanor changed completely. A low hum rose from her throat, the first sound Greer had ever heard her make. Before anyone could react, Whisper bolted toward the truck's ramp, pulling Greer with her. A answering whine came from one of the crates, a brindle-coated dog with Whisper's same watchful eyes. Mother and daughter, separated for years, found each other across the chaos of the auction yard. "Stop them!" Troy shouted, jumping into the truck cab. But Lennox was faster, positioning his vehicle to block the exit. Deputies emerged from their hiding spots as Troy tried to reverse, trapping him completely. Greer raced to the crate, holding the brindle dog. The strap holding it shut was pulled tight, but she had come prepared. Her scissors made quick work of the binding, just as the ramp beneath her feet began to give way. She grabbed the crate and leaped clear as metal screamed and collapsed behind her. "You're under arrest," Lennox announced as deputies handcuffed Troy. Others were already seizing computers and ledgers from the auction office. The evidence was damning, every transaction tied directly back to Milton's accounts. As if summoned by the thought, Milton's luxury car pulled into the lot. His face turned from confusion to fury as he took in the scene. Before he could speak or flee, deputies surrounded his vehicle. "Milton Arledge," the lead deputy said, "step out of the car with your hands where we can see them." Days later, Greer stood on her porch watching an extraordinary scene unfold. Whisper sat at the threshold, as she had so many times before, but now her daughter, renamed Rook, approached the door first. Rook crossed without hesitation, turning to look back at her mother. Whisper's tail wagged once, twice. Then, for the first time since Greer had known her, the dog stepped across the threshold into the house. Her search was finally over. She had found what she'd been looking for all along. Lennox joined Greer on the porch, watching the reunited dogs settle into their home. His suspension had been lifted after Milton's arrest, but he'd chosen to retire, wanting to focus on animal welfare work outside the constraints of a badge. "They're going to need time to heal," he said quietly. Greer nodded. "We'll give them all the time they need. And we'll make sure nothing like this happens again, together." They watched through the window as Whisper and Rook curled up together in the living room, finally at peace. The threshold that had been an impassable barrier for so long was now just another part of home. Thank you for watching. Stories like this remind us who we are. If something touched your heart, go ahead and subscribe. I'll be back tomorrow with another story that just might stay with you.